like to welcome Gretchen Whitmer, Democratic candidate for governor. Thank you so much for participating in our gubernatorial candidate interviews. I'm Jerome Vaughn from WDET. In the room today and asking the questions are members of the Detroit Journalism Cooperative. The DJC is made up of 6 media outlets, including Detroit Public Television, Bridge Magazine, Michigan Radio, Chalkbeat Detroit, New Michigan Media, and of course WDET. We'd also like to thank the John S. and James L. Knight Foundation for their support of this project. Today's panel includes, starting to my left, Kobe Levin from Chalkbeat Detroit, Riley Began from Bridge Magazine, Ed Moore from Detroit Public Television, and Tracy Samilton from Michigan Radio. So for the next hour, each journalist will ask a series of questions and will follow up on your answers if they need more details. I'll give us a 30-minute time reminder so that we can stay on track. The first question in this group about education goes to Kobe Levin.
Ms. Whitmer, polling in Michigan finds widespread support for changing the way our state funds its schools. You've previously said that schools with more low-income students should get more funding. Where does that stand on your list of priorities for education policy?
Very high, and I think when it comes to education, we've got a lot of work to do. I've got kids in the public schools in East Lansing, and while their teachers do an amazing job, I was just at conferences last week. I'm really proud of my kids, but I know that our schools have been shortchanged when it comes to being a priority in the Michigan state budget. The fact of the matter is about $3.5 billion has been siphoned out of the school aid fund to backfill holes in the general fund, and we're paying a dear price for that. Michigan used to have the best public education system in the world, and now we are in the bottom 10 in our own country, which means we're failing generations of kids, and we're really compromising our ability to make sure we've got the concentration of talent that drives an economy, that we've got the schools that support families, that families will move to for opportunity again. Mm-hmm. So as I look at what we're doing in education, there are some fundamentals we got to get right. Number one, we need to stop the raid on the school aid fund. Make sure that those dollars stay in the education of our kids. Number two, I do think that it is time to commission a group to look at long-term funding solutions for our schools. Number three, to wrap our youngest kids around with the supports they need, tripling the number of literacy coaches, for instance. That's how we change what's happening in our schools. Universal early childhood education is another fundamental part of my plan to take us from bottom 10 to top 10 in this country. We've got to work together to get it done.
So there have been numerous reports actually in recent years outlining experts' plans for changing the funding system. One of those came from the School Finance Research Collaborative, which laid out specifics. Here's how much additional funding a school should get for every child with disabilities, for instance. Can you support the findings of, for instance, the School Finance Research Collaborative?
So that was created as a result of, years and years of lack of investment, right? The adequacy study says that we are underfunding the education of every child in Michigan to the tune of thousands of dollars each child. And to complicate matters, what we know is that a child in a high poverty district costs more to educate.
Right.
That's fact. So the same child in a wealthy district costs less to educate than if you've got that child in a high poverty district. And that's why I really support the weighted foundation allowance, so that as we infuse greater resources into education, that we're really making sure we're making the investment necessary to pull kids up in high poverty districts.
And can you get on board with the numbers laid out by the School Finance Research Collaborative?
I believe those numbers to be accurate. To meet that need is going to be a challenge, and that's something that I am dedicated to meeting that need. Now, it's going to take, building a collaborating, building a coalition from business to parents to educators to make sure that we get it done. Because this legislature, I've got to have a legislature that'll work with me so that we can deliver on that. It could be a Republican-controlled legislature, could be Democratic-controlled. We won't know until after November 6th. But here's what I know. Partisan politics is hurting our ability to educate our kids. Public education is one of those budgets in other states that Democrats and Republicans can find common ground on, because it's the education of our kids. And kids aren't Democrats or Republicans, they're kids. And every child has what I think is a birthright to a great education. And so we've got to build the coalition in order to make this a priority. And that's something that I'm absolutely dedicated to doing, not just for my kids, but for every child in the state of Michigan.
Thank you.
An investigation by Chalkbeat and Bridge found that roughly 1 in 3 Detroit elementary school students change schools every year, often because parents are looking for better options. Most of the students who changed schools did not move to a different zip code. Is there anything state government could do to reduce the negative impact of student churn?
So, well, to make sure that they got good schools. They wouldn't keep looking if they had great schools, good choices. People want to talk about education choice as though that in and of itself is the solution. But there's no real choice if you don't have any good options, right? And choice is only a real choice if you have the means and the resources to pursue different school districts. I say let's stop that mindset and let's raise up our school districts. Let's make sure that we make the investment, that we hold schools accountable, that we shut down schools, particularly, for-profit charter schools that are not delivering good results. We do have to have a Detroit-specific strategy. The governor and his Republican legislature failed at giving some real comprehensive oversight to what's happening in the city of Detroit. I want to be a partner to Dr. Beatty, to Mayor Duggan, to Detroit families to make sure that we don't have schools that are just putting money in their pocket and not delivering good results for our kids.
So, talking about that, you've talked a little bit about investing in schools and, improving the quality. Can you talk about, where the money comes from for that sort of investment?
So, I think that first and foremost, if we stop the raids on the school aid fund, like we were just chatting about, that's almost, that's $800 million annually right there. Looking at how we are funding schools, we have an old formula that has never really been analyzed to see has it met the goals. I think we owe it to the taxpayers, but more importantly to the students in our districts to analyze, is this working? Did we meet our goals? Where are we short? What should it really look like? When I was in the legislature, I introduced a package of bills that would have made a greater investment in higher education for students in Michigan. And I paid for it by closing loopholes on the expenditure side of the state budget. This is the side of tax breaks that never get analyzed, whether or not they're meeting our public need, they're meeting their goals. If we just found, a little savings there, you could fund all of this. But we've not done it. And we owe it to the taxpayers to go back and say, does this favorable treatment under the law make sense anymore? And if it doesn't, well, then let's close that loophole and use it to invest in things like the education of our people, closing the skills gap, making sure that everyone's got a real path that'll lead them to a high-wage job. Because this is what business tells us over and over again. This is why Amazon, one of the things they listed is why they didn't come to Michigan. This is what vexes us as a state is the talent gap, and that's what we've got to meet, and it starts with education.
Do you have a specific loophole in mind that might be a good one to eliminate, or?
The thing, though, the way that I want to do it is by convening Republicans and Democrats and economists to looking at the policy that is on there and make recommendations. Not for me to say, you're going to win, you're going to lose. I want experts to sit down and work together and make a recommendation. How can we make this investment? What doesn't make sense anymore? Let's not have the politics ruin it from the get-go. Let's really do the work and get it right.
Ms. Whitmer, you've said you'd like to change the way charter schools are governed in Michigan, perhaps by even forbidding for-profit companies from managing the schools. But nonprofit schools are struggling as well. As a matter of fact, Delta Prep in Detroit just closed just a few weeks ago, and to the surprise of the teachers and to a lot of the families that were going to that school. How specifically do you propose to change charter school regulations?
So we need to have real accountability in schools across Michigan. Charter schools, I have mentioned for-profit charter schools, and I do that because while there are for-profit charter schools across the country, Michigan we are way, way out of the norm. With over 80% of ours are for-profit, which puts us very different than the rest of the country. The problem is it's not the for-profit or the not-for-profit model. It's the fact that charter schools are not having better outcomes than traditional public schools. And when their motive is profit, then they shouldn't be in the business of making money and not educating our kids. That's what I have as a parent, As someone who's raised by a public school teacher, and my grandfather was a superintendent in Pontiac schools, my grandma taught in Waterford. I mean, that's what I find so offensive, that we've got companies that are profiting off of not educating our kids. And that's what I'm focused on. But in terms of making sure that charters are meeting our expectations, we got to hold them to the same standards that we hold our traditional public schools. And if they're not making it, they shouldn't be making money off of not educating our kids.
So what kind of, do you have some ideas as to how you would change the actual way that we're legislating charter schools?
I do, and we've put a pretty comprehensive policy out there, but it starts with transparency, real accountability, having teachers that are meet the state expectations for public schools. I think that all of these are pieces to it, but also closing off their ability to rent property, the facilities to themselves. I think that they've really written into the law ways that they're able to, I think, put more money in their bottom line, and we're paying for it. Our kids are.
Now, supposing the legislature remains Republican after the election, how would you work with them to change the way charter schools are run?
Well, I think that, I've served with 3 different governors during my time in the legislature, and I can tell you that understanding how to work with the legislature is something that is really, really critical to getting an agenda done. Having served myself, I was very successful at crossing the aisle in order to build relationships and to deliver results. The Medicaid expansion never would have happened if Governor Snyder and I didn't find some common ground and work really well together, and I'm proud of that. But same goes for Detroit lighting or for the anti-bullying protections that we got passed and signed into law. I think that we need a governor who is able to build coalitions and work with everyone who wants to solve problems. One of the things that happened during this campaign last week, we had Bernie Sanders come in for me and the Detroit Regional Chamber of Commerce endorse me. 2 kind of ends of the spectrum, both of whom are trying to help me, because I think they've recognized that when we need bipartisan solutions, or at least this is what the chamber said, I stepped up and I helped and I made sure we got things done. And I think that's going to be crucial, whether it's in the education space or in infrastructure. We need a governor who can build relationships and coalitions and fix problems.
So you've proposed a system that would give Michigan students 2 years of debt-free community college, and I have to say that sounds pretty good to me. I have a son, and that's one of the ways I'm planning to get him a college education, is starting out with community college. But how will we pay for this?
So just doing this piece of my economic plan, my Opportunity Scholarship, which is a 2-year debt-free community college opportunity for every student who wants to pursue it, it's about $100 million. $100 million is, in a $56 billion budget, it's not that great of an investment, and it's one that really has an impact on it, making it available for kids to pursue a career, a trade, a path, a skill set that'll lead to a high-wage job. We have good jobs in the state that are going unfilled because we don't have the skills. I've met a young man in Grand Rapids who really wants to be an electrician. Right now he's a dishwasher at a restaurant, and he's paying most of the bills in his household. He's a teenager, and he's paying most of the bills. He wants to become an electrician, but he doesn't have the $6,000 he needs in order to pursue it at the community college locally. $6,000 is standing in the way of this young man who's hardworking, who heads his household, and wants to go in a career that we desperately need people to pursue. And that's why I think just, this $100 million investment has enormous potential return, and we're going to improve people's lives but get more people working in jobs that are going unfilled right now. It is the kind of small investment, when you look at compared to the whole state budget, that can really make a big difference for people's lives.
We're going to move on to roads now. It's one of the issues that Michigan residents have talked about a lot during this campaign, have complained about a lot for years. What's your plan to fix the roads in the state, and how are you going to pay for it?
Yeah, so when I jumped in this race 22 months ago, I never dreamed I would be known as the Fix the Damn Roads lady. But that's what I've become known as. Everywhere I go, people want to talk to me about it. A few people don't like the word damn, but most give me a high five and say, I need you to fix those roads. The saying was coined because I had a conversation with two moms, and I said, what is the most important issue to you? One of them, their son talked about literacy. The other, her son talked about drinking water. They were from Flint. But both the moms said, I need you to fix the roads. But they said, fix the damn roads. The one mom spent $800 to fix her car after hitting a pothole. That was money that she was not expecting to spend. It was not money she could just put on a credit card or write a check for. It was a big hit to her, her household income. It's money out of rent or money out of child care. Our lack of fixing the roads is costing Michigan families out of our pocketbook, but also it's endangering our safety. The fact of the matter is we are all paying for bad roads. We're paying a road tax. It's just in the form of fixing tires and windshields instead of fixing the problem, which gets more and more expensive every year we don't do it. It's compromising our ability to draw investment into Michigan and our ability to maintain our edge and mobility. How can you tell the world we are the place to build cars of the future when our roads look like they're crumbling? So I'm leading with an infrastructure package. It is a $2 billion state investment that draws down another $1 billion from the federal government, runs all through the Rebuild Michigan Infrastructure Bank so that taxpayers know every dollar is actually going where it's supposed to go, because understandably, people don't trust the capital, people in Lansing, to put the money where it's supposed to be going. If I can't get the legislature, if they're too weak to take these votes that I took when I was in the legislature, then I'll go straight to the people and pass a bond, because not fixing this is not an option. It is downright dangerous, and we got to get to work and get it done.
So if you got to that stage and the bonds were approved by residents, how would you repay that debt?
Well, we've got a great plan. It's all on our website, but it is, the paying off the bond debt is, a few $100 million a year, and that's a lot of money. There's no question. But we've got tax credits that are sunsetting that could cover that. We've got, the assumed growth. We've got the internet sales tax that is now we are charging, that is now coming in, another $250 million a year. So there are pieces to get this done. Doing the bond is the alternative if I can't get the legislature to do the user fees that I think it's going to take to get it done.
Several studies show Michigan roads and bridges are in poor condition. We've heard for years that fixes are coming, and that's been not only through the Snyder administration, but you could go back through Granholm and Engler and Blanchard. Will it take some catastrophe like the bridge collapse in Minneapolis back in 2007 to really make significant improvements?
I hope not. It's not what it takes for me to do the right thing. I mean, that's why I'm leading on an infrastructure package. My infrastructure package also would cover replacing the lead pipes that are bringing water into our homes. When we tear up a road, we'd use that as an opportunity to lay the conduit to get every community connected to high-speed broadband. There are ways we can do this work and do it smart so that it inures to our benefit on so many different fronts. But it's not going to be easy, and it's not going to happen overnight. I hope it doesn't take a catastrophe, but let me tell you a story. I was talking to a woman from Ann Arbor the other day. She had an aneurysm, and the ambulance took a route that added 10 minutes to the commute because they didn't want to go over the shortest route that was pothole ridden. It would have endangered her to take the shortest route to the hospital in the midst of having an aneurysm. There are buses full of school kids that are driving to school over bridges that have temporary supports holding them up. We are at that point where we've got to do the work, or we could have a catastrophe, and I don't think anyone wants to see that. I certainly don't want to see that. I want us to start getting the job done now before that happens.
We're now going to move on to questions about the environment. Kobe?
Michigan's so-called polluters pay law was modified in 1994 to allow for partial cleanups of contamination. We now have numerous sites across the state where contaminants like PFAS, dioxin, and vinyl chloride have been partially cleaned up. Do you think that our cleanup system needs to be tightened up, perhaps even to go back to the standard of full cleanups?
Absolutely. You know, we are home to 21% of the world's fresh water is in and around our borders. This is an enormous asset, but it's also an enormous responsibility that we've not taken seriously. As governor, I want to shut down corporate threats to our water. I want to clean up our drinking water. When we see Governor Snyder ask Bill Schuette to file a lawsuit to go after 3M on the PFAS, he asked him to do that back in July. They still haven't done it. We've got dozens of communities that have higher lead in their water than Flint does today because of old infrastructure, but there are dozens more that have PFAS contamination leaching into their drinking water. This is a crisis. This is not something that we can just hope will get better with time. This 3 tablespoons of PFAS in an Olympic-sized swimming pool, that's poison. You know, that's what we're talking about. It doesn't take much of this chemical to create, to cause cancer, to autoimmune diseases. I mean, this is happening in over 15 counties right now in Michigan. And so as you talk to the League of Conservation Voters or the Sierra Club or Clean Water Action, they will tell you we have only seen the tip of the iceberg when it comes to PFAS. And that's why we need to get serious about holding corporate polluters accountable, get to work cleaning up, identifying where all of the problems are, and make Michigan a place where we utilize these great research universities, this enormous resource, and make this a place where people learn about water stewardship, not a laughingstock.
So would you take steps to try to ensure legislatively that a full cleanup was required at every polluted site?
I'm going to hire the finest environmentalists, scientists to run the department and tell me what the best steps are to get moving on this. I've talked to enough people to know, enough experts to know that we've only seen the tip of the iceberg on this. And I think that's why we've got to have a much longer term strategy instead of going and asking a term limited legislature to help figure out what the solution is. Certainly we're going to work together to do it, but I'm going to rely on scientists to examine what the magnitude of the problem is and recommend what the best, quickest way we can proceed to get it cleaned up is.
Most environmental groups want Line 5 shut down, but Governor Snyder's reached an agreement with Enbridge to build a tunnel replacing the line under the Straits of Mackinac. He says it's necessary to supply northern Michigan residents with propane. I know you've pledged to work to revoke Enbridge's easement with the state. How would you convince the courts that Michigan has grounds to do so? And then how would you ensure people in the UP still have access to affordable fuel?
Yeah, so Line 5 is, I think the governor's recent announcement with regard to Line 5 is very troubling. Number one, he's tying the hands of the next governor. Number two, it counts on trusting a company that has shown we have a lot of reasons not to trust them, right? From the representations they've made to the bad studies they've made to their characterization of the condition of Line 5. Wrong, wrong, wrong. And now to trust this company to proceed and to give them the authority is, I think it's really foolish and dangerous. So I do not support Governor Snyder's announcement that he made. I think it's wrong to tie the hands of the next governor. I believe that committing to keeping that line in the water for the next 7 to 10 years while a tunnel is being built is downright dangerous. And so I will go to court. I will challenge it. We have yet to know every aspect to what he's trying to do. There is a meeting from the Bridge Authority 2 days after the election. They're supposed to make some sort of a decision in December. And I've talked to Bridge Authority members who didn't hear anything about it until it came out in the press. This is a problem. And the transparency and the high stakes, I think, are what, or lack of transparency and the high stakes here are what I think concern me the most. I couldn't believe it when I saw that this was what they were announcing, and I think we have yet to learn every piece of it, and that's why what the legal challenge is going to be, I think, remains to be seen based on what action they do or don't do.
Okay. It sounds like the end goal eventually, right, would be to shut down Line 5. That would be your preference?
I want the oil out of the water.
Okay, so if that's the case, how would you ensure people in the UP still have access to affordable fuel?
Well, I think that there are alternatives. Obviously, I'm interested in ensuring that Upers have affordable heat, affordable, propane. That's something that's critical. There are such divergent statistics about how much is actually coming from that line to actually bring down prices. It could be supplemented by some trucks over the bridge. Is that ideal? No, but it might be a good alternative. One boat full could allay those concerns as well. So there are going to be ups, there are positives and negatives to any alternative, but I think the greatest benefit is getting the vast majority of that product out of the water, because it would devastate our economy. It would devastate our agriculture, tourism, and drinking water in the state of Michigan. We bear all of the risk for a foreign company to just move their product through, and it's ridiculous. We got to shut it down.
Thanks.
The state of Michigan is currently involved in 2 lawsuits. One seeking to protect the state from paying damages to people in Flint for educational assistance for children affected by lead-tainted water, and the other for damages to people for things like declines in property value. Now, as governor, what could you or what will you be able to do regarding the state's legal stance in these lawsuits?
Well, I think that's a good question. I think it's also going to depend on who the Attorney General is, right? That we're going to need to work together to make sure that the people of Flint get justice. I believe that it needs to be the centerpiece and the goal. The people of Flint were failed in the worst way by their government at every level. Their biggest asset is their home, which is now, hard to sell if you could sell it at all. I was in Flint a couple months ago, and a woman pulled up her sleeve and showed me this rash all up and down her arm from taking a shower that morning before church. Now, she didn't think that it was lead, but it was all the chemicals that are treating that she's reacted to. She can't bathe the way that she used to in the home that she's lived in. That is her only asset, and now is not worth a whole lot. So I do think that the people of Flint deserve justice. I think that it's going to be incumbent on me as the governor to work with the homeowners and to work with the Attorney General, and to, of course, work with the budget to see what that looks like and what is just and what is doable.
Now, Flint isn't the only municipality in the state struggling with lead contamination, obviously, with its drinking water. What should the state's role be moving forward to deal with issues of water safety or finances that contributed to these problems?
So the Emergency Management Act was the precursor to everything that happened in Flint. And it was something that I opposed when I was in the legislature. It passed anyway, and then we, the people, rejected it at the ballot. And then the Republicans used a gimmick of state government to render the people's right of referendum, useless. They put some money in it and made it an appropriations bill. And so we, the people, had no ability to weigh in again. So they didn't respect the will of the people. They forged ahead, and they put hand-picked people from outside the community to make decisions based on dollars and cents. That's what the whole precursor was. It has created the most horrifying outcomes for people. The fact of the matter is that as governor, I want to make sure that I work with the mayor of Flint, with Dr. Mona, to ensure that we expedite replacement of the pipes, that we replace bottled water, that the kids of Flint have wraparound services. But Flint's not the only part of this state that can't drink their water coming out of their tap right now. That was a man-made crisis. The rest is by neglect. It is because of old pipes. And so that's why part of my infrastructure package is fixing the roads and bridges, but also replacing the lead pipe infrastructure under the ground so that municipalities can make use of this Rebuild Michigan Infrastructure Bank and get to work doing it.
Where does the money come from replacing all the pipes? Because I think you're going to have Detroit to replace. We're going to have a lot of other communities replaced.
Well, it's a part of the rebuild the roads package. It's the $3 billion annually for 20 years. I mean, that's how municipalities will be able to make use of that bank and those dollars, and to leverage some local dollars as well in the process and get to work.
A quick follow-up to that. So is that amount of money going to be enough to do roads, and pipes and other important infrastructure?
Yes, annually, absolutely. And if you look at the governor's own commission, they pegged it between 3 and 4. I wrote a plan that does 3, and that I think is um, part of the calculation here is that we've got to have people to do the work. And with our skills gap, that's going to be a hard thing as well. Even if we could front load all of the dollars in one fell swoop, we wouldn't be able to do the work. Just the manpower and the skill alone would be a problem for us. And so we are going to have to skill up as well. And I think that's a big piece of this conversation that I think we've got to meet as a state to close that skills gap.
Just for you and for the panelists, we've reached the 30-minute mark, so just so everyone knows. Tracy?
We just had a very alarming report on climate change from the UN, which indicated we are not going fast enough, we're not doing enough, we need to go far beyond Paris. Here in this state, we have a commitment from DTE Energy and Consumers Energy to be about 80% lower their emissions by 80% by the year 2040, 2050. But what we're hearing from the UN is this is not going to be enough if we're going to do our part. So what do you think Michigan needs to do?
Well, we have to get more aggressive. There's no question. 2018 was one of the hottest years on record. I think about where we are as a state and how important it's going to be that yes, we enter Michigan into the U.S. Climate Alliance, but that we get much more aggressive in terms of growing our renewable portfolio so that we can lower greenhouse gases and emissions. To do that, when we do that, we benefit our economy too, right? It's going to take high tech workers are required of green energy, right, to build the windmills. And we should be building every part of a turbine here in the state of Michigan. Solar panels. These are advanced manufacturing things we can do. And when you pursue this more aggressive renewable energy portfolio, you necessarily use less fresh water because it requires much less fresh water to produce than fossil fuel energy does. And so there are a lot of benefits to moving forward, but I think that as we address climate change, it's really important to acknowledge it's real. There are a lot of people who still don't think it's real, who think it's unsettled science. My opponent in this race for governor filed, legal document on our behalf with our tax dollars that essentially says that climate change is unsettled science. That kind of mindset is never going to get us to a place where we're addressing it and thinking about future generations on this planet. And that's something that I think is fundamental. I want a cabinet full of people that are experts in their field, that are representative of the diversity of this state, the geographic, the religious, the racial diversity of the state. I want empowered people with different perspectives and expertise sitting around the table making decisions so that we never have a decision like switching to the Flint River again without the important voice of the people who are being impacted by it.
We're going to shift over to talking about economy and taxes, and we'll go to Kobe for that question.
Michigan's economy has grown over the last few years, and we have a fairly low unemployment rate, but the poverty rate is still fairly high. What would you do to ensure that low-income Michiganders are not left behind by the growth in the state?
Well, thanks. I appreciate this question. An low unemployment rate means very little if people aren't coming out of poverty, if home ownership is down, if income hasn't grown at all. And that's the case for a lot of Michigan families. We're never going to address our needs as a state if we turn away from too many families living in poverty. And that's why I support increasing the minimum wage. That's why I support making sure that our families and our people have affordable housing and the opportunity to get the skills they need, and then a way to get to the good job that'll pay them, right? From improving transit in Michigan to fixing the roads or making car insurance affordable. These are all pieces of how do you get to work and get out of the cycle of poverty. And so the skills piece, I think, is the most fundamental, whether you're talking to business people or heads of household. It starts from cradle to career, that we've got to have this mindset that we're going to ensure that every one of us has the skills we need to get into the high wage jobs. That you start with universal early childhood education and you go through the My Opportunity Scholarship at the end of graduation. there is opportunity within our state's borders. Just the jobs right now that are going unfilled are good paying jobs, but we've got to connect people to skills and make sure everyone's got affordable housing options. That's what I hear from Traverse City to Detroit. This is something that motivates me to want to put MISHDA to work and make sure that we're getting resources into actually ensuring people have affordable housing options.
You said you'd like to get rid of the pension tax, but there's no question that Michigan is much more of a retiree state than it was in the past, and the population of younger tax-paying citizens is shrinking instead of growing. If the pension tax is repealed, how would you replace it?
I want to talk about why I want to get rid of the pension tax. You know, Governor Snyder introduced the pension tax in his first year. That was what he was using to pay for business tax breaks. He cut education, tried to eliminate the earned income tax credit for the working poor, and he started taxing pensions. That's how he paid for it. It was pretty much dollar for dollar. It was a choice that he made. Here's what I know. There are a lot of people in our state that worked their whole lives. They played by the rules. They worked hard. They took a lower salary while they were working because they knew the benefit, the deferred compensation, was going to be a pension at the end of their work life. They played by the rules. They did the calculation. They retired when they retired. And then the state came in and changed the rules and threw a lot of seniors into a precarious situation where they couldn't make their bills. A lot of people are in dire straits because of this. I think it's wrong to change the rules on someone at the end of their career. At 80 years old, you're not going to go back and start fighting fires again, right? These are people that need relief, and it's something that I opposed when the governor pushed it through. It is something that I will sign into law, the repeal of it, when it gets to my desk. And I know it's coming because Republicans and Democrats alike want to get rid of the pension tax. So how do we pay for it is the question, right? It's $250 to $300 million is what I believe the price tag is. And it is a price tag that gets lower and lower because fewer and fewer people are going to have pensions. So it necessarily declines with time, but it's something that I think is a priority, no question. It was wrong to do it in the first place, and it's something that I'm committed to repealing. And I will make sure that I told you about the internet tax that's coming online. I told you about the growth that's anticipated. I told you about closing loopholes. There are ways to make sure that our priorities are right, and it starts with getting rid of the pension tax.
Okay.
Is one of those ways possibly repealing the corporate tax cuts that Snyder introduced back in 2008 that caused a $2 billion drop in revenue during that period?
I've not put that on the table.
I'd like you to talk about the impact of the state budget cuts on municipalities. It's caused a lot of budget problems with the revenue sharing going down. It's been played a role in emergency takeovers. Given the current budget, is there anything that can be done to increase revenue sharing to municipalities?
So, as a legislator who, worked the state budget, I understand the importance of revenue sharing and how critical it is to communities, municipalities, and their provision of frontline service like fire service and police protection. I think we've got some serious issues to tackle immediately, but I recognize how important revenue sharing is, and that's something that I'm eager to work with partners like Mayor Duggan, to Mayor Shore in Lansing, to Mayor Bliss in Grand Rapids, to put together a real long-term solution on revenue sharing. My call to action, first and foremost, is to make sure everyone's got clean drinking water and safe roads to travel, to close the skills gap. These are the fundamentals that I'm going to spend all my energy on day one. But this is an important issue that I think we've got to have a long-term strategy with our leaders of municipalities, and we're going to get that started on day one.
Detroit Mayor Mike Duggan is one of many people talking about how high auto insurance rates are in Michigan, especially in urban areas. What would you propose to address the issue?
So, yeah, I talk to people all across the state. I mean, Detroiters, without question, feel it the worst. But auto insurance rates come up everywhere that I go. people look more at the cost of their insurance before they even look at the car note. That's how out of whack it is, especially for Detroiters. So one of the things that I know is in the first 6 months of next year, we're going to put together a plan, pull all the stakeholders to the table, and get it through the legislature. A plan that protects people that are tragically injured in a car accident, but also requires that insurers treat ratepayers fairly, that they pay their bills on time, that there's transparency, and that they can't decide rates based on non-driving factors. This discriminatory practice of redlining means that people with bad credit ratings, or people that live in certain zip codes, or people that have their marital status or their education level, these are factors that are used against ratepayers and are having a discriminatory impact. And they have nothing to do with your driving record and should not be used against you. The insurance industry has written all of the rules, and they're making money hand over fist, and we, the people, are paying. We're paying. It's coming out of rent and groceries, and that's why it's critical that we get it done and give people relief in this state.
Do you put all the responsibility for that on the insurance industry, or does the healthcare industry, or do attorneys have any responsibility for the problem as well?
I'm so glad you asked the follow-up, because I forgot to talk about fraud, right? I think we have a responsibility to make sure that we get rid of, take abuse and fraud out of the system. So without question, there is fraud. There's fraud, and, we've got a duty to make sure that we eliminate it. And it swings both sides, right? So it means there are any unscrupulous charges, any unscrupulous lawyering, any unscrupulous insurance practices. We need to have a real consumer protection advocate in the governor's at the executive level, and that's going to be the insurance commissioner that I appoint, and hopefully in conjunction with the attorney general that will get elected November 6th as well.
I think we have time just for a couple more questions. We wanted to move on. Kobe?
So with the confirmation of Brett Kavanaugh to the U.S. Supreme Court, there is a greater likelihood that Roe v. Wade might be overturned. You've said you'd protect a woman's right to choose, but what legislation would you propose specifically to ensure that Michiganders have access to abortions?
Yeah, so, this is a right to control my own body and make my own choices was something that has always been a part of how I viewed myself as a Michigander, as an American, that this was a right that was enshrined. Now it is in jeopardy. And as the mom of 2 daughters, I want to make sure that my kids have this same right, that every woman in Michigan and in the United States has that right as well. If Kavanaugh and the Supreme Court repeal, throw out Roe v. Wade, then we here in Michigan revert to a 1931 law that criminalizes abortion, that would render family planning doctors felons. So we need to change the law. That's something that I'm going to spearhead, enshrining the spirit of Roe v. Wade in state statute as a right for every Michigan woman and her family. To also move forward and ensure that there is access to contraceptive care, that we fund family planning organizations, that women have the full, rights that we have right now under the law, that would be protected here in Michigan. Other states have taken those steps. We in Michigan need to do that. And if we don't, it is going to absolutely hurt our ability to be competitive, to make sure that this is a place where our young people stay and others come to for opportunity again. Because I would be very understanding if my daughters didn't want to come back to Michigan because they wouldn't have the same set of rights that they would have in other states. So this is not just about having full rights as an American, all the freedoms of being a human being on this planet, but also our competitive ability here in Michigan.
What's your plan for dealing with Michigan's escalating opioid crisis?
So one of the plans that I've put out is a 6-point plan when it comes to the opioid crisis. First, we need to declare a state of emergency. It enables us to marshal the resources necessary to create the real-time statewide monitoring system for prescription writing. Right now, I read a statistic that we have 11 million prescriptions for opioids in Michigan. We have 10 million people. So we are way overprescribed, and there's not a regular statewide database that has been used like they have in other states. But we also need to recognize that addiction is not a moral failing, it is a disease. And And we need to make sure that people that are suffering from the disease have the supports they need to combat it, to manage it, whether it is through the mental health support or the addiction recovery support. These are critical components as well.
Thanks.
That's all the time we have. We want to say thank you on behalf of all the members of the Detroit Journalism Cooperative here. Thank you for taking the time to join us.
Thank you. Thank you for the work that you all do.